Okay, so my presentation is entitled Feed Ahead, Ways to Incorporate an Active Panel with STEAM Challenges. Like Amanda said, I have recently moved into the library and media space. Oh, and while this is loading, let me just give out a little information. I've been having internet trouble. It worked fine all morning long. And then when I started to get ready to present and go through my presentation one last time for practice, my internet dropped me 3 times in 10 minutes. So if I disappear, just be patient. I'll come back. For a
No
little
problem,
back,
Crystal. We've got you. We all understand the challenges of connecting remotely.
thank you. And it doesn't it always seem to happen when you're in a technology conference?
Always.
So, like Amanda said, my name is Crystal White. I chose country roads because I was born and raised in West Virginia. I have been in North Carolina for about 20 years, though, so it's really home. I attended Marshall University, and then when I graduated, I got a job teaching first grade at Thomasville Primary School. I have been in a variety of positions at Thomasville Primary, but they have all been at Thomasville Primary. So in my almost 20 years of teaching, I've done them all in Thomasville. I was really honored to be the Instructional Technology Teacher of the Year last year, and then even more honored when my district voted me Instructional Technology Teacher of the Year because I feel like our youngest learners sometimes get left out of the joy and the technology thing because they don't access it in the same way. So I've become really passionate about helping those littlest learners access technology, but also be safe on technology because that's a big thing. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes about how I design and implement STEAM challenges, which if you're not familiar with STEAM, it's just like STEM with the addition of art. And I like those because it makes because the drawing pieces and the art pieces are really good development for our youngest learners. So I like to incorporate that a lot. So, the things that I think about when I am planning a challenge is first, I do some brainstorming and I think about what they are studying in the classroom. I think about what we've been talking about and learning in the library. I think about the materials that I have available. How can I link it to literacy in some way? I'm the librarian, so it's really important for me to constantly be linking the things we do to literacy. Which parts of STEAM do I want to focus on? And what do I want the students to actually build or make or draw? So after I do some of that brainstorming, I start doing my planning. And the first thing I do is I think about what we want to have produced at the end. So I start with the end in mind. Then I make a decision about what materials they're going to use. And a lot of that, sometimes that just comes down to accessibility. What do I have available to me? What can I get really cheaply at the dollar store? Especially because a lot of the times I end up doing this challenge with 8 classes in one day. So that's a lot of materials. And then I think about how much time I want to give them for each of the steps. Then I work out a way to start the lesson, and that generally is with a book because, again, we're in the library. And then which parts of STEAM do we need to learn and review? When I was a full time classroom teacher, we had pretty much taught all the processes, and so it didn't take a lot. But in the library space, don't want to assume that students remember something that we talked about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. So I always kind of reteach and review whatever it is, whatever part of STEAM we are focusing on. There are some things on the active panel that I think of as kind of like my active panel magic buttons because they make STEAM challenges so easy. The first one is the source button. So for my setup, I hardwire my laptop into my active panel. And I do that because when I'm seeing all of these classes, it's just easier organizationally for me to have all of my stuff on my computer. So, a presentation that I've built or any videos that we're going to watch, those are all on my laptop, and I can just switch the source over, and that lets me toggle back and forth because the students will do their work generally on the whiteboard app. And so it's an easy way to switch back and forth. The other button that I think is quite magic is the annotate button. And I like that because it allows me to go over top of whatever is on the board. And so works really good if we're, if I want to annotate over a video or something, but also if I want to highlight something that a student has drawn on the whiteboard app or something that a student has shared, I don't want to mess up that student's drawing. I want to leave their drawing intact, but then I can pull the annotate button up and kind of like circle and draw arrows and say, oh, like, look at this, look at how they designed this and drew this without messing up their original work. That's really important when you're working with young children. And then the whiteboard app is it's just magic to me. I love that it's never ending. You can keep scrolling. When you combine it with the 20-point touch capabilities, I will generally do a grid like you see in this picture. It's not a great grid. The lines aren't straight, but it's a grid. And so students can come to the board and I can have there's 8 places for students to share what they have designed. So I find that usually 4 of my students will fit in front of the board at a time, and then they can all draw in their little space. And then when they leave, I can call someone up to draw in the space above or below that. And that works really well for us. So I'm going to share with you a challenge that I recently did with a group of students, and I called this one Little Pig, Let Me In. One of my favorite ways to design challenges is around fairy tales. I find that my kids, they already know them. They don't have to read the whole story. We can do a quick review of it. They're popular and there's a lot of design elements in them. So I focused this challenge on using engineering and on using art. Some science did come in at the end, but it was a natural tie-in, not something I planned for. Now, this challenge, I did organize it, or I completed it a little differently. When I'm in my library classes, I generally see 8 classes a day. And so I work through the whole school building within a week. But this challenge I did with a group that I see every day because it's their teacher's planning period. I do her coverage this year. And so I see them every day, which gave us a little more time to spend on our challenge. This one I did spread out over 2 days, but honestly, I probably could have done 3, but the teacher was willing to give me a little extra time on the second day so that we could wrap it all up. So the first thing that we do is use story. As the librarian, I'm really kind of against watching read alouds on the board. There's some copyright infringements to worry about, but I also think it sets a bad tone. I'm a librarian. I read books to children. But there's always exceptions. And in this case, it was an exception because this was the author of the story, the true story of the 3 little pigs, reading his book out loud to children. And so that was on Epic. So I wasn't worried about breaking any copyright. Everything was safe and good, and it was free to share. So we did that. The kids always enjoy hearing authors read their own story. So that's how we started to review the story on that one. For this challenge, I focused on the engineering process and art. And we always talk about all of the steps of the engineering process when we're doing that. And so I like to use a circular pattern for the kids. I find that it's one that really highlights that reflection and redesign part of the process. I like to include art. I think I mentioned it earlier, but our K-3 kids, they still need a lot of development in their fine motor skills and even a lot of gross motor skills. So doing that art and having crayons and pencils and papers, it makes a great way to do that. So after reading the story, we watched a video on the engineering process and we talked about each step. For this challenge, we defined our problem as the wolf keeps blowing down the houses of the little pigs, so they need a safe place to live. The house must be able to withstand the huffing and the puffing of the wolf. And The huffing and the puffing of the wolf is provided by a hairdryer. I bring my hairdryer in and I aim it at it. And if you're curious, the hairdryer works really well for tornado, um, for pretending to be a tornado, like if you're doing something with the Wizard of Oz, because I've done that where they had to design a house that would withstand a tornado. So during the planning solutions part of the engineering process, I let the students draw what they think the house should look like. And so they can use their pencils and they can use crayons, and they just draw what they think a house would look like that is going to withstand a um a the huffing and puffing of the wolf. And then this is where I like the board comes in, the active panel comes in really handy, because as students are finishing their drawing, I can send them up to the board and I can say, okay, I want, and I'll write their name. I'll be like, this is your space. I want you to write here, show us your drawing here, show us your drawing here. And it's a great way for kids to share what they're doing and show off. The other thing that I like about the board, because of the size of it, you can do so one child sits, I call another up, and they can draw in an additional space. So I generally give students between 5 and 8 minutes to draw their plan. I use the source button to switch back and forth from my computer to the whiteboard app, and then they get to showcase it. Now, this is not something that I have done because my students are younger and they don't have one-to-one devices. But if you have students that have one-to-one devices, you can also use the screen share option. And so you could have them all log in, and then you could just say like, okay, let's see this one and let's see this one. And then you could pull it up that way if your students are one-to-one. All right, so when it comes time to creating a model, I find that the use of the timer is important. Let me rewind. When it came time to creating models for this challenge, I gave students manipulatives that I have in the library that are part of our makerspace. So we have these materials, so I laid them out. I did that for a couple of reasons. One, our kids need to be touching these kinds of manipulatives. It develops their spatial awareness and it helps develop their fine motor control. But two, I could really easily spray these down with disinfectant that we have to use for all the materials that students touch because of the COVID-19 virus. So this made it easy to clean up. In the past, I've used pipe cleaners, I've used paper, I've used boxes like cardboard boxes, popsicle sticks, anything that I have just laying around the library, I tend to incorporate into a challenge. The important part of the STEAM challenge is the process that kids go through, not so much what materials they're using. So use what you have and focus on the process. So I said earlier that I split this into 2 days. And so on the first day, we did like the story and the engineering process and the planning part. And then on the second day, when students came in, we reviewed what we did and what our problem was. And then I gave them their designs, and then they got to use the manipulatives to create their design. So I find timer is really beneficial. This creating process, it tends to become a runaway train. So once we started creating, it's easy to just keep going and keep going and keep going. So if I say to them, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to create, I like to set the timer because that helps them plan, but it also holds me accountable. And that stops our 10 minutes from becoming 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then we've used up all of our time. So for several reasons, I gave this group of students 12 minutes to design their first creation and to work with the materials. One of those reasons is that these kids, as kindergartners, had their year cut short, and so they had not had a lot of experience in STEAM challenges in kindergarten. And then again in first grade, the first part of our year was virtual, and then even after we had kids in the building, I was still teaching virtually. So now that I'm finally getting kids into my library space, I've kind of extended the time limit so that they get lots of hands-on time for things. So they had, I think I gave them 12 minutes. It might have been 10, but I really think it was 12. So the next step is kind of a really fun part. And after they create their initial creations, I would go around and use my hair dryer to try to blow them down. Generally, some of them will fall, some of them will stand. We had really sturdy materials this time, so there wasn't a lot of falling down. But as we test the product, I give the students an opportunity to share what they think about the design and why it worked or why it didn't work. My goal is for the students to be doing all of this talking, not me. Now, sometimes the students don't, so I step in and do some modeling of that. Um, but my goal is for the students to do all that. And I didn't get any good pictures of this because I'm a one woman show in the library. But what I usually do is have the students show their creation using a webcam or a document camera, and then that allows all of the students to see what's happening. So all of the students can stay engaged and offer ideas or thoughts the um about the design without all of us kind of like standing around one crowded table, especially with COVID and germs and all of that. So the sixth step is the reflection and the redesign. Honestly, I find this step to be really hard for my students. They tend to think of their design as like a one and done thing, and they either passed or they failed. As the librarian, that makes me really sad. And I just try to encourage them, like, no, like you don't get a grade on this. Like there's no grade. Like you're just growing and learning. Um, and so, but I do make sure that I spend a lot of time modeling this reflection process and thinking out loud about like, oh, well, maybe when I go back to the table, I'll add this block here or I'll change this space here, so that they can kind of see my internal workings. And then I give students a fairly large amount of time. So if I gave them 10 minutes to design, I usually give them 10 minutes to reflect and redesign. And then we retest the product to see if it worked. So I'm going to share with you some of the creations that my students did. And then I'm going to share with you some of the things they said about their creations and their reasoning behind it and some of the science that they worked in. So this house was built out of magnet tiles, and it came about quite naturally that magnets would hold the house together. And that wasn't me. That didn't come from me. That came from one of the first graders, who said, oh, well, maybe your house didn't fall apart because the magnets were holding it together. Um, so it was just a natural science incorporation. This house made of blocks, it also stood. The fence moved a little bit, which led to a discussion of, was the fence a necessary part of the design? And again, that wasn't me. That was students' conversation that they brought up. This design right here is a great example of like a before the test and after the test. I don't think, like right here on the left, this was his first, oops. This was his first, the child's first design. I don't think they understood what the purpose of our time was. So when they showed it to everybody, they were kind of like, I wasn't done yet. So then when they went back to the table to do their redesign, they put they put it together like it is on the right. And what they said about it was, I put the house on wheels because even if the wolf huffs and puffs all day long, the house is just going to roll further away from the wolf. So the pigs are going to stay safe, which I thought was really ingenious. These two were built out of blocks, and I forget what the green things are called. But one of the conversations that came up was about how the huffing and puffing, the breath of the wolf, could blow through the windows, and maybe that's why their house didn't fall down, because the wind wasn't knocking it down; it was just going through the house. And the one that was built on the right, the builder said they built it low to the ground because they thought the breath would just kind of pass over it. And they even said, like when we have a tornado drill, you tell us, or, our teachers tell us that we had to get low down to the ground. So I thought maybe that would make the house stay up. So that is the end of my presentation. I know it was short, but I thank every one of you for showing up today and coming, and I hope that you have learned something. If you have any questions after the presentation, or if you want to reach out, if you're a library media specialist or you need a library media specialist, I know not all schools have them, but if I can help you in any way, you can reach me at whitec@tcs.k12.nc.us. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. I think I speak for everybody by just saying, I think we had a comment in the chat that said, I wish I could be a student in your class. It's just such a great highlight of how you worked through the steps, the process, the technology, the hands-on. That was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Of course. I'm going to pass it over to our Promethean team for just a moment. So Crystal, if you can hang on, we'll just see if there's any questions or comments for you in our chat.